Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on organizing like a pro. I'm Nicole. I'm the Director of Customer Success here at the Neat Company, and I've worked with Neat for over 10 years now, helping Neat users get organized and, most importantly, stay organized with Neat tools. With me today, I have George, Tia, and Melissa, who are all customer success leads here at the Neat Company with a combined experience of over 15 years at Neat. They're going to be active in chat, helping you to answer all of your Neat related questions. So, as we go through this webinar, please feel free to post any questions that you have in the chat box, and someone will get you an answer as soon as possible. Today's webinar focuses on beginner topics in Neat, such as what data is important for record keeping and how to organize your files once they're in Neat. We're also going to go over Neat item types and how they differ, Neat file categories and how you can use those categories to learn valuable insights about your files. And lastly, we're going to go over some recommendations we have for how to set up a folder structure that is easy to manage. These topics are all tied together through our three-step workflow for organizing your files and building your database in Neat. And while today's webinar is on beginners topics, it's also great for existing Neat users who just want a refresher on how you can best organize your files in Neat so that you can find them easily and also use your data for reporting and insights. We also have a couple downloadable handouts to share with you today in a bit, so make sure you stick around for those. And at the end, we'll make sure to do a quick Q&A session with whatever time we have left. So let's get started. Since this is a beginner's course, let's just firstly talk about what data is actually important for record keeping. So Neat is a cloud-based system, and it helps you transform your physical paper and files into digital files. And digital receipts and scans are entirely acceptable by the IRS, as long as they are legible, complete, and accessible upon request. So make sure you're utilizing digital storage. In fact, the IRS actually encourages electronic storage, provided that you have a system that is reliable and secure. The IRS requires that receipts used for tax deductions or expense documentation include specific information to be considered valid. So here's what your digital records must include for the IRS to accept them. They have to include the amount. Even if the amount is under $75, it must be recorded precisely. You need to also have a date when the expense was incurred. You also need to store the location, the place where a purchase or service was made. This might be, the vendor of a particular receipt. You also need to store the business purpose, why the expense was necessary, and how it relates to your business or your tax deduction. And then finally, the recipient or relationship, if applicable. Whoever was involved in this particular purchase, whether that be a client lunch or something else. So this is the data that is important to the IRS for record keeping purposes. This is the data that you want to store in Neat. And you also might want to know, how long do you actually need to store these records for? Well, the IRS recommends that you keep most records for at least 3 years, though some situations require that you hold on to them for longer. So the general rule of thumb for tax records is that you should store them for at least 3 years. However, you should store them for at least 6 years if the income that you reported was underreported by 25% or more. And you should store your records for up to 7 years if you're claiming a loss from worthless securities or bad debt. The absolute safest bet is just to create and use a system that keeps everything for at least 7 years, just to be sure. Now, with an active Neat Cloud subscription, you can easily store an unlimited number of files for as long as you'd like in Neat with an active Neat Cloud subscription. So now that we know what data is important for record keeping and how long you should keep those records, how can Neat actually help you organize that data? To get into this, we're going to first talk about the anatomy of a neat file and what makes neat so powerful. So here we have a neat file. This is what a neat file looks like when you open it up in your Neat account. And each neat file has a data section to the left, all of this data here. And then it has an image section to the right, which is your actual scanned or imported image. And this data is what makes up your Neat database. So all this data to the left here is all the data that you're able to use in your reports and your filters and your CSV exports. And this is where a lot of the power of Neat comes from. Other storage solutions like Google Drive, Dropbox, or just an external hard drive don't allow you to label and categorize your files to the level that Neat offers. Through all of this data here, through your categorizations and your classifications, you're able to establish a consistent naming convention for your files, which any certified professional organizer would tell you is absolutely necessary for having a well-organized database. So you can see here, we use all of that data in a Neat file and we transform it into this very easy to read and analyze data. In addition, this is a consistent naming convention. I have consistent dates and names and vendors and categories for all of my files. Now, for more organization best practices, check out our webinar called Organization Best Practices on neat.com/webinars. Through there, we go over other organization best practices and why things like a consistent naming convention is important for a database. So going back over to our slides real quick. So this is the anatomy of a Neat file. Like I said, we have the data section to the left and the image section to the right. On the left in the data section, it's broken up into a couple different parts. So there's 4 parts. You have the file item type, the folder, the file fields, and the file notes. We're going to hop back over into Neat and I'm going to talk about each of those. So up at the top here, we have the item type. This is part 1. There are 9 different item types that you can store in Neat, and each item type has its own set of file fields and functions. So you do have to be careful about which item type you select, and we're going to come back to item types in a bit. To the right of your item type, you have your file folder, and this simply tells you where your file is located within your database. When you click on the folder dropdown, you can see your whole folder structure here to see what that structure looks like. And you can even select and move your file to different folders from here. Then this whole middle section here is your file fields sections. And they're actually broken up into 2 different parts. Up at the top, you have your file detail fields here. And then at the bottom, you have your file classification fields. So your file detail fields tell you key facts about the file, such as the name of the file, the dates associated with the file, and the amounts associated with the file. Information that is factual about the file. Here is where you would store your amount, your date, and your location data that the IRS requires for acceptable record keeping. And then in the classification section here, the file classification section, these fields are for your unique classifications of a file, how you want to categorize the file, which of your unique projects or customers or products you want to associate with this file. Here is where you could store information about your business purpose or your recipient and your relationship with the person who is involved within this particular purchase. And lastly, at the bottom, you have your file notes. And your file notes are separate from your file fields. They are treated a little bit differently, but the file notes allow you to further clarify other details about your file. And your file notes are keyword searchable, so any notes that you put in there can be keyword searched. Your notes are also exportable, so you can export your file notes along with the CSV export that you do of your other data. And your notes will also flow through to your file grid and also to your Neat expense reports as well. So the notes are also a pretty powerful section of a file. So now that we know what data is important for record keeping and how Neat can help you actually organize that data, let's now move on to our recommended data entry workflow. And like I said, this workflow is designed to ensure that as you upload files to Neat and build your Neat database, your files have accurate data, because that is the overall goal, having an accurate and organized database. So we're going to go back to our slides here real quick to talk about data accuracy. Data accuracy is the most important characteristic that makes your data usable and purposeful. Incorrect, incomplete, or inaccurate data will impact your Neat insights, your Neat reports, and also it'll just impact how easy it is to find your files in Neat later on. And then data shows that it takes on average just 1 minute per file to go through this workflow and to verify your file's data is accurate as you enter it into Neat. The longer that you don't deal with your files and let them pile up, the more time you'll have to spend down the line trying to fix them. That is why we recommend this 3-step workflow that will ensure that your data is accurate and therefore meaningful. So let's go through each step real quick, and then we'll talk about these in a little bit more depth. In step number 1, you need to review your files and check that they're accurate, especially the fields that the IRS requires for record keeping, like the amounts and the dates and the location. Now, Neat helps you out with this step by extracting key information for you, such as dates, amounts, and vendors, from your files with our OCR technology. But you still need to review your files and check that the data that was parsed is accurate. Checking is the only way to know 100% that all the data is accurate. Once you know all the data is accurate, then you also want to make sure that each one of your file's category fields is filled in with the category that best represents the type of file or expense it is. And each individual user can categorize their expenses in their own unique way for their own unique needs. Now, Neat also helps you out with this step through our smart categorization feature. So, smart categorization will actually learn over time how you prefer to categorize expenses from certain vendors. And it will actually automatically apply your preferred categorizations to receipts and other files moving forward. And smart categorization gets even more personalized over time. So, the more that you categorize your files, the smarter smart categorization will get. And lastly, the last step of our 3-step workflow is to double check and make sure that your file is in the right folder within your database. And this is super important for easy reporting later, and also for preventing the mixing of your business and personal files in Neat if you are using Neat for both business and personal file organization. So that's a quick overview of what the 3-step workflow is. Let's look at each step individually. And as we do, we're going to talk more about our item types, categories, and folders in Neat. So you've added a bunch of files to Neat, and now you need to apply this workflow to those files to ensure that they're organized accurately. I always recommend getting in the habit of logging into Neat and checking your needs review filter. Your needs review filter contains all of the newly added files you've added to Neat since the last time you logged in, regardless of the folder that you have them saved in. So the needs review filter just allows you to quickly access anything that you've added to Neat recently. It shows you exactly how many files you actually need to review and categorize and save away so that all of your files are now up to date. So you want to log into Neat. You should see your needs review filter to the left with a number of files in it. And you want to start working through those files in that filter. In step 1 of this workflow, you should focus on making sure that the data is accurate in 2 main parts of your file. You want to review and make sure that your file item type is accurate, that you've selected the item type that best represents the type of file this is. And you also want to make sure your file detail fields are accurate, such as your amounts, your dates, and your locations. So why is it important to check your file item type? Well, item types in Neat are a standard way that you're able to encode your files for storage in Neat. And as I mentioned earlier, there are 9 different item types that you can store in Neat, and each type has its own set of file detail fields and functions. And those file fields and functions can actually affect your usage of other parts of the application. Now, you'll see in my slide here that I have 2 different item types. I have a document to the left and a receipt to the right. And you can see how the document has very specific item types or very specific file fields such as title and type, whereas receipt has different file fields such as vendor and date and currency. And so you need to be careful about which item type you select. Otherwise, you won't have all of the same file fields to fill in for a file if you've selected the wrong item type. Now, every user will have different storage goals with Neat, and they therefore may use different item types for similar files. Mostly, it's important that you select the best match item type for your file based on what your storage goals are. And right now, we're actually going to share a handout with you in a moment. And this handout is going to go over and define all of the different item types Neat in more detail. It's going to provide you with different use cases, and it also highlights each item type's specific file fields for you. So if you're not sure about which item types to select for your files in Neat and want some recommendations from us, then go ahead and download that handout now. And while you guys do that, we're going to pop over into Neat and we're going to go through step 1 of the workflow real quick. So step 1 of the workflow is that you should check your needs review filter. So again, I mentioned, here's my needs review filter, and I see this little 9 icon next to it, meaning that there are 9 new files that I've added to my account that I haven't yet reviewed. So we're going to open this Rival Bros Coffee receipt. And again, I should basically go through all 9 files and make sure that their data is accurate, that they are categorized, and they're stored in the right folder within my database. So here's my file, and the item type is accurate because this is a receipt. So that is correct. I don't need to make any changes there. Next, I want to go in and I want to make sure that the vendor and the date and the amounts are all accurate. And like I mentioned earlier, Neat will help you fill out these fields through machine parsing. However, no parsing tools will ever be 100% accurate. Factors like the quality of your source file and the format of your source file can impact the accuracy of the data that gets parsed. So checking your file detail fields for accuracy takes just seconds to complete, and it ensures that you'll have a well-organized database that is easily searchable and properly set up for reporting, insights, and tax preparation. So I'm just going through and I can see that, the vendor is accurate, the date is accurate, the payment type is also accurate, and so is the amount and tax. So all of my file detail fields up top here are accurate. I've captured my amounts, my dates, and my location for the IRS if it's ever needed. Let's move on to step 2 of the workflow. And to do that, we're going to hop back to our slides. Okay. Here we are in step 2. In this step, you will be updating your file categorization and classification fields. So Neat will actually automatically add a category field for you during this process based off of any smart categorizations that you've created and also on what it knows about the vendor. But the category that you end up selecting here is really up to you and what your unique storage goals are. Now, the category field, which I starred for you, is especially helpful for file insights and reporting. And by having well-organized categories here, you can monitor your spending patterns, identify areas where you need to make cutbacks, or make some changes to your spending as well. When categorizing your files, there are also a couple different levels to how specific you can be with your categorizations. A question that we commonly get is, what should I put in there for my category? And the category, like I said, really depends on you and what your unique goals are. But there are few levels to how specific you can be. So you can see on the slide here, we kind of have a funnel. And up at the top, it's very broad, which is more level one. These are very general categories. For example, general retail would be considered a level one category. Maybe just expenses or something like that would also be considered a level one category. These are really general. And then, you have level two, which is a little bit more specific categorizations. And then you have level three, which is really specific and detailed and distinct when it comes to categorizations. I actually have an example to show you guys. This is my favorite example for this. I have a movie ticket here. Now, Neat automatically, when I scanned and imported this file into Neat automatically categorized this file as a general retail receipt, and that is perfectly fine. If I'm really only using Neat for document storage and I'm not interested in the reporting aspects of it or the insights aspects of Neat, then I could just leave this as general retail, and that's fine. However, if I were to include this receipt in a report later on, this receipt for a movie is going to be grouped in with all of my other general retail receipts contributing to that total. And at that point, I'm losing valuable insights about where I actually spent my money. So, if I were to maybe get a little bit more specific with this categorization, I can maybe update the category from general retail to a level two category as entertainment. And now, when I run a report including this receipt, my entertainment receipts will be separated from my general retail receipts, providing me with more information about where I'm actually spending my money. And then, if I wanted to be as specific as I possibly could with this and as detailed as I could with this expense categorization, I could go with like a level three category, which would be more like movies or movie ticket. Which now, when I include this in a report, I am separating out, entertainment from general receipts, but then also movies from other entertainment receipts like meals or restaurants or something else. So, just by being more specific with your categorizations, you can learn valuable insights about what types of expenses you're spending your money on. And then you can make adjustments to how you're spending your money to make better or healthier business decisions or spending decisions. So, we actually have a handout that we're going to share with you in a moment that goes over these categorization levels. And it also provides you with more sample level two and level three categorizations that you can use for your own inspiration. In this handout, we've also included both personal and business expense category samples. I highly recommend going through the lists that we provide in this handout and marking off which ones you want to use for your data, and then incorporating those into your database. This handout is also our data accuracy and three-step workflow handout. So not only does it include details about categorizations and these different levels, but it also includes our three-step workflow and the details that you need to know for each of these steps. So I definitely recommend downloading that when that becomes available. So we're going to hop into Neat right now, and we're going to categorize that receipt that I was working on earlier. And we're also going to talk quickly about smart categorization. So here we have my Rival Bros coffee receipt. Now, this is labeled as meals and entertainment. So that's perfect. That's the category that I would want for this particular receipt. So I've gone in, I made sure my item type is accurate. I've made sure my receipt details, my file detail fields, my amounts, my dates, my locations are accurate. I've added an expense category to it as well. And then the other thing is that you have all of these other classifications here as well to further classify your file. These remaining fields here in this section actually need to be filled out by you because they are here for your unique classifications. Neat doesn't know which project or product or location this particular receipt should be associated with. But Neat does give you the ability to create lists of your customers, projects, and products, and then use those fields to essentially tag your files for reports and to track specific purchases. Adding these additional classifications will significantly help with searching and reporting later as well. So, for example, maybe this was coffee that I purchased for a customer named June. Maybe this is the Philadelphia, PA location. Maybe I can add a project um, like a new project here. I could even go in and I can add some notes as well. So these, like I said, these additional classifications will make it easier for me to filter and find this file later as well, and also distinguish this file amongst other files when I run reports later on. Now, one thing that I wanted to further talk about was these categories, and specifically the smart categorization feature. And so to do that, I'm going to save this. To do that, we're going to go back to our needs review filter. So I have a couple files here called blank vendor. I left these as blank because I wanted to demonstrate for you the smart categorization feature. So, for example, I have a vendor in my database called my new vendor, I believe. So I have this my new vendor here that I can select. Notice that my category is already starting to update, and that's because of smart categorization. So I'm going to create a new vendor. We're going to just call it new vendor organization pro. And we're going to apply a category to it. The category is going to be my organization pro category. So I have just created a new vendor in my database, and I've also created a new category in my database as well, and we're going to click Save. We're going to go to the next blank vendor in my list here, which is this new file. We're on 2 of 8. So now I'm going to go in and I am going to apply that new vendor again. We're going to call it new vendor organization pro. And notice that immediately after I type that vendor in, the category down here updated to Organization Pro category. And that's because when I set up the new vendor and I assigned a category to it, Neat learned that that is the category that I prefer for this vendor. So we can save this, and we'll do this one last time with this last one here. It's new vendor, and I can choose new vendor organization pro, and immediately the category updates again to organization pro category. If I made another selection, like let me see if I have one that I've already assigned. Like if I chose Fog City Vapor, I'm going to see the category vaping here because I've assigned the category vaping to the vendor Fog City Vapor. Now, there is no proactive way to make that change. You can't go into the settings and map a vendor to a category. Neat, through smart categorization, learns your preferred categories as you go through and you make those changes. So you can't go in and you can't manually change the vendors and assign a category to it. But as you add new vendors and assign categories to those vendors, Neat will learn those preferred categorizations and apply them for you. Now, anytime a vendor, this new vendor dash organization pro is detected by Neat, it will automatically apply this organization pro category to it, streamlining my categorization workflow. All right. So lastly, I wanted to go in and I wanted to talk about the last step of our workflow, which has to do with folders. So once you've checked that the item type is accurate, you've made sure that your file detail fields, your amounts, your dates, your locations are all accurate. You've gone in and you've assigned an expense category and you've added additional classifications and notes to your file. The last and final step of the workflow is to make sure that you save your file in the right folder within your file cabinet. And I know that seems really simple, but it is a very important step for making your database easy to manage. So, your cabinet folder structure is actually going to set the precedent for how you organize your files moving forward. And if you're not careful, you could create more work for yourself down the line if you just start creating a bunch of folders and throwing files in them. Now, Neat's customizable folder structure allows you to organize your data and manage your expenses in a way that fits your unique needs best. But you should still be careful with how you set it up. Each one of you will have your own unique folder needs. However, there are a few common folder structures that we could recommend to you and some tips that we can share that'll help you set up a folder structure that is easy to manage and simple to use for reporting and insights later. My biggest tip for you when it comes to setting up folders in your database is to keep it simple. The fewer folders that you have, the better. It's certainly okay to create folders and create some folders, subfolders in them. But you're starting to get into dangerous territory when you have subfolders within subfolders within subfolders within subfolders. Try to keep your folder levels to, maybe 3 or 4 levels. One example that I have for this is, if you have, you want to store receipts, documents, invoices, reports, and any files related to like a particular project or a property or customer in a single folder rather than saving them across multiple folders. It's actually going to be easier for you to run reports and find files with fewer folders later. And Neat has very powerful filter and sorting tools that allow you to sort by item type and vendors and amounts. So, storing all of your files for one particular project in one folder will not make it more confusing. It'll actually simplify your search and retrieval later. Another example that I have for you is if you're using Neat for tax prep, we actually recommend creating a folder in your Neat cabinet simply called tax documents, and then creating a subfolder for each year for your tax documents, and that you store all your tax documents and all your receipts for the year in that one folder, adding to it as you acquire new receipts and tax documents throughout the year. Keeping all your tax documents in one folder simplifies organization, and it'll help reduce the chance of error in your tax return by minimizing the risk of accidentally overlooking or leaving out a receipt that may have been stored in other folders across your database. Having one centralized folder makes it very easy to find everything you need when you need it. And for tax prep reporting, it's going to make that tax report that you generate in Neat at the end of the year that much easier because everything will be stored in one folder. Now, another folder tip that we have for you is if you're using Neat for both business and personal use, then you want to make sure that you keep your business files separate from your personal files. And a really simple way to do that is just to create two main parent folders, one for business and one for personal, and then nest all your subfolders in these two main parent folders. Other common folder structures include organizing your files by year, by project, by customer, or property, and then storing everything in those folders related to that year or project or customer. Now, we're actually going to share another handout with you right now, and this handout is going to go over our recommendations for picking a folder structure based on some of our top use cases. So when that handout becomes available, make sure you download that now. So let's hop back into Neat, and we're just going to apply this to the last few files that are in our needs review folder. I have made sure that the item type for this is accurate. I know that the vendor, the date, the amounts, and the sales tax are all accurate. I've added a category to this. I could go ahead and maybe add a project or a product or a customer if I needed to, add notes if I need to. In this case, I don't. And I'm making sure that I'm storing this in the proper folder in my database. You'll see within my folder structure here that I have a business folder and I have a personal folder. In my personal folder, I have a folder called receipts and then a folder for each year. And I store all my 2025 receipts in one folder, all my 2024 receipts in another folder, similar to the way you might organize your physical receipts if you have them in a physical filing cabinet. So I'm saving this in my 2025 personal folder, and we can click save. So that's it. That's the workflow. It's really, really simple. All you want to do, like I said, you want to log into Neat, check your needs review filter. I only have 5 files in my needs review filter now because I've reviewed a few. And you just want to work through each of these files. So, file number 1, it's a receipt which is accurate. The vendor name is accurate, the date is accurate, the payment type is accurate, the amount is also accurate, and the sales tax is also accurate. My category is accurate, and that's because through smart categorization, Neat knows that when I have the vendor Eventbrite, that I want the category entertainment applied to it. And I can even go in and add some other classifications to my file if I'd like to. Lastly, I'm making sure that I've stored this file in the right folder within my database under my personal 2025 receipts folder, and we'll click save. We're going to move on to my next one here. We have a Lowe's receipt. This is stored in a different folder in my database. It's actually an incorrect folder. So we're going to come back to that. First, we have, this is definitely a receipt, which is the proper item type. It's for Lowe's. The date is proper. The payment type is proper. The amounts and the sales tax are also accurate. Now I have a category for gardening. In this case, I am going to update this to home improvement. And then I am also going to change the folder here. So this was a 2023 folder or 2023 receipt. So I'm going to put this back in my 2023 personal receipts folder and save. Here we have a receipt from Pico for $209.20 for 18/20/25, no sales tax. We got the proper item type here. The category is accurate because, again, through smart categorization, Neat knows whenever Pico is my vendor, utilities is the proper category. I could add some other notes if I wanted to, and I'm going to make sure that this is in my 2025 personal receipts folder and save. And then I would do this for the rest of the files within my needs review filter until I got to the last one. Once you've reviewed all of your files, you've opened each one of your files in the needs review filter, and you've walked through that workflow, your files will naturally be removed out of your needs review filter, and they'll be saved in the folders that you had saved them in. So we can see in my 2025 folder, we have all of those receipts that I was just looking at here. So that's it. That is our recommended 3-step workflow for ensuring that you have a well-organized database. And we also went over a number of beginners topics, like what types of item types there are available in Neat, the different expense categories and category levels, what data is important for record keeping, and how you can create a folder structure that is simple for reporting and search and retrieval later. With that, I want to open this up to a quick Q&A session where we can answer some of the questions that have come in throughout this webinar. So let's take a look here. Antonio asks a great question. Antonio says, how do I get my folder structure in the order that I want? It seems like I can only store my files in ABC order. Antonio, that's a great question. And yeah, it seems like the folder structure is a little limited at first glance. By default, Neat does store your folders in an alphabetical structure or numerical structure. So, it's always going to put them in alphabetical order. And what that means is oftentimes customers don't have their folder in the order that they want. For example, we have like this 2025, let's do this. This 2024 folder here. So if I created a folder for 2024, and then I created a folder for each month under 2024, what'll happen is we see that Neat puts those subfolders into alphabetical order, with April being first and September being last. But that is typically not the order that users want their structure to be in. They want the months folders to be in order in order of which they happen. So in order to get your folder structure to be in a particular type of order, what you can do is you can assign each one of your subfolders a number. So like here for January, I assigned 01, for February 02, March 03, etc., to December 12. And by doing this, like I said, Neat puts your folders into an either alphabetical or numerical order. So it will start putting it in a numerical order, and then you can get that folder structure to be in the order that you want. So you can order your folders in a specific order by assigning numbers or special characters to your folder. For example, you'll also see that I've starred my favorite folder so that my favorite folder is at the very top of my list versus at the bottom of my list. So that's how you can restructure your folder structure into the order that you want by assigning numbers instead of defaulting to the ABC order. It's a great question, Antonio. Let's see, what other types of questions have come in? So we have a question from Jennifer. Jennifer says, can I copy folders from previous years? And Jennifer, that is another great question related to folders, and absolutely you can. So you can actually copy both folders and files in Neat. In order to do so, find a folder that you want to copy. So say, for example, I have like this 2025 monthly order folder. It's 2025 along with all of the years for 2020, or all of the months for 2025. Sorry. If you right click on a folder, you can click duplicate. And then you can go ahead and you can actually copy that folder structure. You can choose to include subfolders or not. So by selecting to include subfolders, Neat will duplicate my 2025 folder plus all of the subfolders included with it. We're going to save it in my webinars location. Maybe we'll name this 2026 instead. And I'm going to remove the copy from here. So this will be 2026 monthly order. And I'm going to click duplicate. And now we can see Neat is working on automatically creating 16 new folders for me. And we can see that it is now done. And if I now look at my folder structure here, I now have a new folder here with like 13, 14 other subfolders here in the same exact order as my 2025 monthly order structure. Now, none of the files were copied over, only the folders themselves. So these are all empty shells that I can now use for 2026 moving forward. I did mention that you can also copy files in Neat as well. So for example, if we went into my personal 2025 folder here, and maybe I wanted to copy this TJ Maxx receipt, I could go ahead and I can right click it and choose copy. And then I can create a copy that I can save anywhere in my database. I can save it in another folder, or I can save it directly back to my 2025 folder. And now we can see that I actually have two TJ Maxx receipts in here totaling $41.86. So Allison, I hope that answers your question. I'm sorry, Jennifer, I hope that answers your question. Okay, let's see. What other types of questions have come in here? Maybe take one or two other questions. All right. So Nancy asks, what if I accidentally reviewed files in my needs review filter and they're no longer there? Nancy, that's another great question. So if you say, for example, you go through your files in your needs review filter and they're now all removed out of this filter, you can re-add files to the needs review filter at any point in time by right-clicking on a file and choosing to mark the file as needs review. By doing that, you'll see that the status is now updated to needs review, and now I have one file sitting in my needs review folder that needs to be reviewed. Right-clicking on a file and choosing to mark a file as needs review essentially flags the file for you and re-adds adds it to your needs review filter so that you can easily access it later. This feature is really beneficial if you are sharing your account with other users and you need to collaborate with them. Maybe, for example, someone you're working with uploaded a file and they mark it as needs review so that you can go in and easily find the file that they need you to review. That's one really helpful benefit of it. The others is, maybe you weren't finished reviewing a file and you need to come back to it. Or maybe you're waiting for more information about a receipt or about a customer and you mark the file as needs review until you get that information. And again, as simply as opening the file and reviewing the file will remove the file from your needs review filter. So I hope that answers your question. All right. Let's take one more question here. Okay, so Thomas asks, how secure is Neat? And Thomas, what a fantastic question. I think that'll be our last question for today. And I'm actually going to share our security features page with you as I kind of answer this question for you. Security is so important to me. We take data security very seriously. It is our top priority. And Neat ensures that your data is secure with several robust measures, including bank level security encryption for both stored and transmitted data. Our systems are also monitored 24/7, and they're also hosted in leading data centers with strict access controls, so no one's accessing your data. Neat is backed up to ensure a 99.9% uptime, meaning our site is rarely ever down for any reason, meaning that you'll always have access to your data. And our systems are regularly audited and penetration tested. We also have a very firm policy that we will never sell any of your customer information to any third parties. Again, we take your data security very seriously. So we have this page, neat.com/security, that goes into some of these details a bit more. I highly recommend checking this out. You can also, feel free to send an email if you want more specifics about data security, and we'd be more than happy to answer any specific questions that you have about how we protect your data. So I think that's where we're going to wrap for today. I appreciate you guys so much for spending some time with me today. I do have one last thing for you guys, and that is a survey. So just like all of our other webinars, I'm going to share a survey with you guys in a moment, and this survey is going to give you the ability to let us know how we did. You can let us know if you found this webinar to be helpful at all, if you learned anything from it, and if there's other topics that you would like us to cover in webinars as well. So make sure you click on that survey and provide feedback if you can. But with that, thank you guys so much for, again, for joining me today to go over how to organize like a pro and to go over some beginner topics in Neat. I hope that you all have a fantastic rest of your day, and we'll be seeing you soon. Bye.